listening to Steep into Stillness with me, Sophia, a space where we slow down together and find gentle ways to move through everyday life. For this moment, we'll focus on something that often shows up at the end of the day: anxiety before sleep. It's not always intense or obvious. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it feels like restlessness. Sometimes it shows up as thoughts that don't settle, even when the day is over. Nighttime has a way of changing how thoughts behave. During the day, there are distractions: school, conversations, movement, noise. But at night, when those things fade, the mind is often left with more space than it is used to. That space can fill quickly. It might look like replaying something that happened earlier: a comment in class, a message that didn't get a response, a moment that felt awkward or unfinished. It might sound like running through tomorrow's schedule repeatedly, even though nothing new is being added. It might feel like a general sense of unease without a clear reason attached to it. Sometimes the anxiety attaches itself to very small things: a sentence that came out wrong, a decision that could have gone differently, a worry that barely registered during the day but feels heavier once everything is quiet. Other times it's broader: thoughts about the future, about school, friendships, directions, or whether things are going to work out the way that they're supposed to, or at least the way that they're supposed to in your head. Thoughts that don't necessarily want answers, they just want attention. And then there's also the pressure of sleep itself, the awareness of the clock, the idea of needing to fall asleep soon, the quiet calculation of how many hours are left. That pressure can slowly turn rest into a task, something to succeed at rather than something that happens naturally. And then there's the frustration of being tired but alert. The body feels ready to rest, but the mind keeps moving. Thoughts jump between topics, sometimes without connection, and sometimes circling the same idea over and over. Nighttime can also bring emotional honesty. Feelings that were set aside earlier, stress, sadness, excitement, disappointment, can surface when there's finally room for them. None of this means the night is doing something wrong. It means the mind is responding to stillness in the way that it knows how. Anxiety before sleep often has less to do with danger and more to do with how the brain transitions from being awake to resting. So during the day, the brain relies heavily on the prefrontal cortex, the area responsible for planning, reasoning, and keeping thoughts organized. It works best when there's structure, stimulation, and external input. At night, as the stimulation fades, the prefrontal cortex naturally becomes less active. At the same time, the limbic system, which processes emotion and memory, becomes more noticeable. Within that system is the amygdala, a structure responsible for detecting threat and responding emotionally. The amygdala doesn't analyze details, it reacts based on feeling. When the prefrontal cortex quiets down and the amygdala stays active, thoughts can feel less controlled and more emotionally charged. This is why worries at night often feel bigger, heavier, or harder to reason through. There's also the role of cortisol, a hormone involved in alertness and stress. Cortisol follows a daily rhythm, higher in the morning to help wake the body, and lower at night to allow rest. Stress, irregular schedules, or emotional overload can disrupt that rhythm. When cortisol remains elevated in the evening, the body can feel exhausted while the mind stays alert, often described as being wired but tired. Sleep itself is regulated by two systems. One is sleep pressure, which builds the longer someone is awake. The other is the circadian rhythm, the internal clock that signals when the body expects sleep. Anxiety can interfere with both. Active thoughts stimulate the nervous system, reducing sleep pressure. Stress signals can confuse the circadian rhythm, making it harder for the body to recognize that it's time to rest. There is also a state called hyperarousal. This is when the nervous system remains partially activated even when the body is still. It's common in anxiety, especially at night when there's less distraction. Hyperarousal does not mean danger. It means the system designed to keep someone alert hasn't been powered down yet. Understanding all this doesn't make anxiety disappear, but it can soften the experience. It reframes the moment from something wrong to something complex, and complexity takes time, not force. When anxiety shows up before sleep, it is often not asking to be solved. It's asking for the nervous system to feel a little safer. One way that happens is through containment, giving anxious thoughts a boundary instead of letting them spread across the entire night. For example, when the mind keeps returning to something unresolved, a conversation, a worry about tomorrow, a decision that doesn't feel settled, the anxiety often comes from trying to hold the whole thing at once. Letting the thought exist in a smaller way can reduce its intensity. Now, this might look like mentally placing the concern in a specific time, recognizing that it belongs to tomorrow or later in the week rather than right now. Not resolving it, just postponing it. The brain often calms once it knows that the thought hasn't been forgotten. Another way anxiety softens is through physical grounding, even without intentional breathing or visualization. The nervous system responds strongly to sensation, small physical cues, such as the weight of a blanket, the temperature of the room, the feeling of lying still, give the brain evidence that the body is safe. This is why simply getting comfortable can help more than thinking through the anxiety ever does. The body often leads the mind into calm, not the other way around. Anxiety can also quiet when the mind is given something neutral to focus on, not stimulating and not emotionally charged. This might be following the rhythm of a fan, listening to a familiar sound, or gently noticing repetitive patterns like shadows or distant noise. These aren't distractions meant to block thoughts. They're anchors that keep the mind from drifting into worry. There's also value in removing pressure from sleep itself. Anxiety often increases when rest is treated like a requirement. Letting go of the idea that sleep has to happen immediately or even at all can ease the nervous system. Rest doesn't only happen when unconscious. The body still benefits from lying down, being still, and allowing muscles to release. Sometimes anxiety fades when sleep is no longer the goal. Another quiet shift happens when thoughts are allowed to move sideways instead of forward. Rather than allowing a worry to its conclusion, the mind can be allowed to wander gently to neutral memories, familiar routines, or low-stakes thoughts that don't require decisions. This isn't avoidance. It's giving the brain a softer pathway. Over time, the nervous system thinks that nighttime doesn't always lead to threat or overthinking. It learns that stillness can be tolerable, and eventually it becomes easier. Not every night will feel calm, but even partial ease matters. Even a few quieter minutes matter. Anxiety before sleep doesn't need to be defeated or solved tonight. It can be noticed, understood, and allowed to pass in its own time. Rest doesn't always arrive at once. Sometimes it comes gradually, and sometimes that's enough. Thank you for taking this moment to slow down with me. This has been Steep into Stillness.